Hi again, everyone. Today we take a closer look at the impact investment landscape at our Investing in Design to Improve Life event. And speakers, Henry McLoughlin, Director of Capricorn LLC, Thibault Duchemin, Founder and CEO of Ava, and Carmen Hijosa, Founder and Chief Creative and Innovation Officer of Ananas, Anam, discussing the effects of an increasingly democratized industry to non-conventional fundraising strategies, the good, the bad, and the complex on the table for this candid discussion.
Hi everyone, welcome to our Investing in Design to Improve Life event. This is a session where we're joined by a purpose-driven investor and two founders to discuss the modern investment world across design and innovation. Purpose-driven investment has many facets to it. Strong mission-driven teams, thoroughly tested innovative products that are measurably making a difference. Moreover, the right backing from financial supporters to help scale solutions to reach their intended users. This is about aligning capital, financial, social, and human capital to mobilize solutions to scale for the betterment of people and planet. I'm delighted to invite our panelists today to have a discussion together where they impart some wisdom and share their experience. And we hope that this will inspire you. With their varied backgrounds and perspectives on what the drivers of change are in the investing field of impact investing and how they see the industry evolving for the better. So for you, the audience, if you have any questions for our panelists today, please send them to us on our Instagram and we'll get them to the panelists later in the session. But before further ado, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves, say hi, where you're based, how you're connected to the Index project. So let's start off with you, Henry.
Hi, Lisa, and hi, Thibault and Carmen and everyone who's joining us from around the world. It's great to be here today. I'm based in New York. I work with a firm called Capricorn Investment Group. And what we do is we deploy capital into clean technologies and business models that have the ability to help us address the climate change crisis. So that's really our focus. We've been lucky that some of our portfolio companies over the past years have been selected by Lisa's team at Index for one case, won the award many years ago with Tesla, and I think a few others were shortlisted over the years, including Saildrone, the previous cycle 2 years ago. And I think this idea of where technology meets the climate challenge, meets design and imagination and new ideas on how we can tackle these incredibly important issues that we're faced with. That's a theme that's very close to our hearts because we've seen it again and again in the companies we invest in that reimagining things that we take for granted is a very important part of creating successful technology, successful business, and ultimately addressing these crucial issues like climate change that we're all facing.
Carmen. Hello, Carmen.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. And very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm Carmen Hijosa, the founder of a company called Ananasanam. And this company has developed and I invented a new textile material, which is called Piñatex, which is made from the waste of the pineapple harvest. And it can be used as an alternative to leather and petroleum-based textiles in the fashion and interiors and very soon in the automotive industry. So we are really into the fashion industry, developing plant-based materials from zero to where we are today. And this is the journey that we will be sharing with you. And our link is really that we were a finalist in 2017 of the Index Prizes Index Award. And also they are really part of our funding strategy, if you like.
Great, thank you for that. And Tibal, hello.
Hello, guys. So thanks so much for inviting us. So I'm based in San Francisco usually. I'm in Paris right now. I'm the founder of a startup called Ava. Eva, we really focus on making conversations between people who are deaf and hard of hearing and their hearing counterparts and peers to make those conversations possible. So we basically developed a mobile app and a desktop app during the pandemic as well to obviously address some of the ongoing challenges, which was simply that, you imagine you have a deaf person in a social situation. How does the exchange and the communication happen? And it's been very problematic to make it work. So we developed a set of solutions around speech recognition and basically had to reinvent the technology out there and make it work for this population. So kind of very early on, we had directed kind of our launch video in the early days. So, I kind of drew inspiration from Amélie. I used to kind of interpret for my family who's deaf, this movie, and I loved it. So that movie went viral, this launch video, and we ended up sort of leading to a fundraising, and that's where Index basically contacted us, and we had a great chat, and they invested in our round. So very glad to be here and to be sharing some of the experiences.
Thank you for that, Tivolt. So Henry, you're investing in some very, very scalable technologies, and you talked about climate change and investing into solutions that are addressing climate change. Personally, your personal background, how did you personally get into investing into impact businesses?
Yeah, well, that's I think that would be obviously an interesting question for most of us on this panel, and most of the people listening as well, right? Because how you choose to hopefully direct your career towards things that you also care and value, care about and value, as Thibault was describing and Carmen was describing for their businesses. I think it's an important element in anyone who's in this field, whether it's impact investing or social entrepreneurship, or frankly just creating technologies that help improve people's lives or help improve the state of the planet. I think in my case, I've always been since I was a little kid, I've always cared a lot about the environment, about the welfare of the planet, of animals. I remember walking around my neighborhood growing up, handing out flyers against whaling and against the hunting of seals and all sorts of things. So I think I was kind of like known in my neighborhood for being a young environmental campaigner. But if you accelerate many years past that, I think it became clear to me that climate change was really the challenge of not of our generation. Frankly, it's a multi-generational challenge, but it's certainly the challenge of this century and possibly of the centuries to come. And I wanted to figure out the best way to be active there. And then, of course, there are many things you can do in trying to address the climate crisis. And I thought that where I would come in is try to channel some of the capital, some of the vast sums of capital that are available in the world towards solutions. And I was very lucky to find this team here at Capricorn that essentially had that ethos. And we've been a B Corp for many years, and we really have that ethos of how do we reconcile what is essentially a business, but also driven by purpose and driven by a mission. And we've been incredibly lucky that certainly entrepreneurs now around the world recognize that there's expectations from their employees, from their investors, from the general public, that they serve a greater purpose than just having a great business, but they also need to deliver great outcomes for all their stakeholders and deliver better outcomes for society and for the planet. And so I think we're lucky to be in a moment where this is mainstream thinking. And now we just need to accelerate it further, and more capital, more great entrepreneurs, more great ideas, and move much faster still.
Wow, great! I love that multi-generational challenge. I think that's like a key thing that we need to be thinking about here. Carmen, for the designers that are listening to us today, you're a designer and a researcher, and of course your background. With that focus on waste to value, creating Ananasanam, also a B Corp, so we have a thematic here already. It was a project that was developed over 30 years ago. started out as a research project, and now you're a company with a vast team across different regions. How was that path for you, taking an idea and a concept and bringing it to life and building a company off of that?
Yes, it's funny to look back on that, and then you really see it kind of backwards. It's like looking at a movie going backwards. Wow, wow, wow. So all of it, I think I could really say it was, if I go back to the beginning, right? How do you go from one idea in your head to something which is a reality, and now it's a good reality? It is a lonely journey, it is an exciting journey, and it is a very exhausting journey as well, because it really is everything there. And I think, again, looking back, I think it's really important when you start from zero, which was my case, to recognize the critical moments where you either have to know that you have to go on or to go backwards. You have to think about, I think I know this one, or I don't know this one, and I have to really start talking to people. I think you need to keep very proactive, but also very aware of your surroundings. It's a very interesting thing. It's you and the world, and you have to really be in there. And you pick up whatever it comes to you. I'm pretty good at that, and I'll give you a little example. At some point, and this is even, when was that? Late, before I went to London, that I started everything. I had about an A5 of this sample, Piñatex. I had no more than that. It was my precious little proof of concept. And I heard about cradle to cradle. It was the most extraordinary thing for me, because I thought, my God, I'm not on my own. There's people there that they know about this circular economy. Cradle to cradle, really, as a designer, was really incredible. And then, of course, Michael Brangard was my hero, In fact, it's funny because he was one of the assessors of my PhD years later. And I did everything I could to go to see Michael Brangard, because I thought, I need to listen to this man and see what he has to say. And he's a wonderful person, and he really did see me, and he gave me such a good advice that it kept me going for nearly a whole year, what he told me, his advice. So, I think this is kind of the thing of how do you keep your vision, and how can you keep your enthusiasm, and how do you go from, what is important today, what is important yesterday. So it's a very fluid, a very focused as well journey, and you have to really take it all on board, the good and the bad. So as long as you've got a strong vision, and this is really what is important for me, a strong vision that is absolutely the light. You follow the light. It's like following the North Star. So whatever happens, you follow that one. So this is a little bit how it was for me.
Great, that's wonderful. I mean, I love this expression, the lonely, exciting, exhausting journey. I mean, Tivolt, I'm going to jump straight into you right now, right? So, of course, you just gave a little intro to the background of how you created Ava. I mean, I'm going to come back to your personal story as well. So your personal background as the only hearing child in a deaf family. So your mission is deeply personal here. So, how do you feel your own experience has been or helped you in building Ava?
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. Like, I basically kind of grew up in the marmot, hearing about the issues every day. So there's been actually a movie that just came out called Coda in the US by Apple, which was originally kind of a French movie who talks about that kind of a unique situation. I think people say that you have less chances to be born with an all deaf member in your family than being struck by lightning twice, just in terms of odds. I think for me, it's like, it's more of a, being born in a different culture. It's like within France, my parents were deaf, and we were part of the deaf culture and the deaf community. That means that, like, language is not just, sound, it's also visual. And all of this kind of informs, and I think creating more possibilities about seeing what could happen in the world. So, when I grew up, it's like, obviously got very nourished by understanding how not accessible the world was for my parents and my sister. And so sometimes it was about me kind of trying to make the interpreter or the intermediary, but it's not sustainable, it's not scalable. So we kept talking about some problems there, and I think this kind of like led to realizing that there needed to be a solution. And I grew up as an engineer, and very much sort of always jumped to think about like what could be done, what could be solved. At the time, the only solution I thought was like, okay, you can just be an interpreter, and that's good, but it doesn't sort of solve the problem for 450 million people. So I went to Berkeley and kind of heard about machine learning at the time, and got interested in speech recognition. And there I was like, oh, actually, I know there's something to be done. And my first project was actually sort of like around a sign language glove, and you see them, every year popping out, and it kind of makes the news because the idea is very powerful. It's like just puts like a glove on your hands, and suddenly you sign and it works, right? And people want this kind of solution. But the problem is that the sign language is so hard to sort of like make as a solution and kind of digitize in a machine learning way that most teams kind of like, run out of steam and stop. And I think what kind of sets us apart there is like, we met a mentor, a bit like Carmen, it's like sometimes there's this figure very early on. I was 21. So his name is Steve Blank. So he kind of like led to the agile development and lean startup movement. So he was an incredible mentor. And he told me like, are you ready to drop the glove? Are you ready to kind of part away from this idea that's very compelling that everybody's telling you that you should build? Because like, obviously there's some issues there. So we went on and we actually talked to 160, deaf or hard of hearing people around campus in the Bay Area, sometimes, online as well. But this was like in the space of like 10 weeks. So it was very, very short and a lot of conversation. That was like one of the most, eye-opening sort of like time in my life to really connect with users. And I think that sense of empathy and connection really has to always be held, when you as a founder keep building a company and grow. Suddenly, like, it becomes a business and there's like many areas you need to focus on. I'm kind of a designer fiber as well, like more of a sort of self-made designer. And I think it's so important to always remind, your team, your peers to always take the word of the user first, and actually to take time and to reconnect with this all the time. It's like I talk to support, to the people who talk to actual customers and users, and I tell them like, your voice is what matters in the company, right? And sort of make the time to kind of like have them being heard in all hands meetings and things like that, because I think it's just the most important part. So as you grow, obviously building a product is really important. We had this situation where with COVID, life just became so much harder for deaf people. Like you have to imagine, like in a conversation one-on-one, they get about 25% of what's being said by just reading lips, right? And 25 is not a lot. So the whole rest is like them trying to kind of fill the blanks. But as soon as you add people, it's harder. When you add a mask, it's 0%, nobody can understand. So if you're in an office and the office has mask guidelines and you're taking a call, it's impossible for them to understand their coworkers. On top of this, some platforms just like were not very good and you needed to deactivate the video. And so the whole COVID crisis for us was like an exercise of coming back to our origins, because we had created an app for group conversations. We had to like rethink what was kind of the correct apparatus for, video calls and online conferences, and basically shift from in-person to in-person and online as well. And so we kind of devised this, very simple desktop app that you download and it kind of like covers on top of every single screen you're using. So it doesn't matter which platform you're using, and you have real-time captions that is appearing. So it's almost like you watch Netflix, you have this kind of caption bar, you extract that bar from the window and you just make it available for you all the time. And that kind of like care of making it simple, if you're a founder or if you're the designer voice within your company, so important that you just make it heard and you come back to the roots of make things simple and easy for users. And I think that's what we're able to do successfully. And obviously the product was useful and launched and adopted.
Fantastic. I mean, that's just obviously really critical, being user driven and really focused on the needs of the users and of course empowering, right? So I mean, as an investor, I mean, we also have a responsibility to ensure that the capital that we deploy can empower. Coming back to you, Henry, I mean, there are a lot of different types of investment products out there that are really directed to doing good, right? So there's many different types of products. There's ethical, there's sustainable, there's impact investing, there's ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance for those that don't know. And oftentimes it's very, very difficult to differentiate between one or the other. I mean, for you, I mean, coming back, I'm being very personal here, and also this is what's most curious for us and for our listeners is like, what does impact investing really mean to you, given what you've heard from founders like Carmen and Tivolt, how driven they are by their missions?
Yeah, I mean, impact investing can mean a lot of different things to different people. I think our flavor of it is, by addressing incredibly important societal or environmental issues, like Thibault and Carmen are doing with their respective ventures, you will actually be rewarded ultimately if you have the right business, the right technology that addresses those issues. And so our view is, it's by tackling important problems that are helpful to society that we fulfill our role in business or as investors. And I think people often forget, what was the original sort of like social license to operate for the finance industry, which like the whole purpose of finance for the capital markets industry is to provide capital to address society's needs, right? And I think that's been lost a little bit along the way, for sure. But so I think in a way the impact investment movement is a return to the roots of what finance is supposed to be, which is to provide capital to people, to entrepreneurs, to organizations who require that capital to meet society's needs. And it's now a very rich environment in which to do that, right? I don't think this went from being maybe a little bit of a niche idea 10 or 15 years ago, when the whole impact movement was essentially recreated in the mid 2000s. And I say recreated because I think a version of that had existed for many decades or centuries before. Now I think it's almost an anomaly if you're running a business, especially a young business or a very entrepreneurial technology focused business, and you don't actually have some sort of higher mission that you're trying to fulfill. Like, I think people are a bit surprised, like, well, why are you doing this, right? It's just to create incremental change. And Carmen was describing like her pathway and her journey business, and I really like what you said around the vision. And I think in many ways, for us when we're looking at companies, I'm often asking myself, what's the aspect that's incremental change? Essentially, like, what are you making things a little bit better? And there's a lot of value in making things a little bit better across many different areas. But what's incredibly exciting is when you have this transformational change, right? And where you find it, I think I think the right way to look at it is, where does this technology, where does this new business fit in the world as it exists today? And you learn a lot from asking that question, like, where do I fit in which supply chain? Like, who needs this product today? Who's a potential customer, potential client? Because as Thibault and Carmen, I'm sure, have figured out long before I did, what's more interesting is to figure out, like, where do I not fit, right? Like, what's not there and could be there and should be there, right? And I think it's when you figure out that second part, like, what's missing and how do I fill a need or meet a problem that has been left unaddressed because it was assumed to be too complicated or not important enough, or the people who benefit from it or are not are being overlooked in the way the economy functions today. But then you're on to something very unique and very special. And in essence, I think that's when you're entering the impact segment of the economy and of finance, right? Because you've actually figured out what's missing and how it's going to help people and help the planet.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of like there's a red thread, I think, across all three of you here. I'm going to come back to you, Carmen. So I'm just trying to visualize you running around with this little sample of the very first Pinatex. And you found your little missing piece, as Henry just referred to it. So somehow you're onto something that's really unique, and that this is your moment to really shift the industry. And of course, the origins of Ananasanam was really just being witness to the unethical practices within the leather tanneries and wanting to do something about it. And sometimes that grand vision of trying to challenge a status quo can feel incredibly lonely, as you mentioned earlier on. So can I ask, what has been the hardest part and the hardest or most challenging part of actually trying to build a sustainable business, knowing you've got this little sample here that could actually really change the world?
Yeah. A sustainable business, I don't really like to even use this word anymore. It's a regenerative business. It's a living system. This is the way I see it more and more, right? It's a bit like nature. I mean, we have to work more and more like nature, in tune with nature. It's easy for us because, we do work with nature. But it changes all the time and it metamorphoses all the time. And that's kind of the challenging and the wonderful thing about it, that the challenges, are different. I mean, think of start from zero. What is the first thing you have to do? You really have to get a team. You have to really get connections. You have to really get seed capital. This is really the beginning, and it took probably about 5 years to get to that point. I mean, I was very lucky that because I was part of the Royal College of Art doing this PhD. I was awarded, if you like, I could go to their incubator, which was amazing, but that's really where you really get into advice, into business plans, into all these things. So that's kind of the first level. And I was very lucky that I was guided through that. And then you get into the second really stage, which is, building a supply chain and the structure, the team, the systems, and obviously funding is the red thread going through all this, because you need seed capital. Then you need more and more and more and more and more. And that is really the common thing, is looking for capital to really go from one stage to another. But I think what is important is to recognize in all these challenges yourself, and really understand, particularly as a founder, as an inventor of a product, how far can I go? What are my strengths and weaknesses? And, can I bring this little baby, which is not more, it's growing really quick, and now it needs more than me here. Can I do it myself? Can I really have to let go of something and bring on the different skills that we need? And I think that's actually a huge challenge for us, as we can see in here, for entrepreneurs, for people that start something. And that's part of the challenge, So as you go from one metamorphosis to another, you change, you adapt, you learn. It's an ongoing, I always think that it's like, my life is it's a PhD all over the time, because you really have to learn and adapt. And I think that is the biggest challenge, actually, Know your strengths and weaknesses, learn and adapt, and know when one stage goes into the other, and then you have to really say, hey, hang on here, what is needed at this point, and be humble, really, to say, no, that's not for me anymore, or I need this, or I need the other, I need your help, I need your advice. So that's the way I see the challenges.
I can see you nodding along, Tivolt. Does this resonate with you?
Definitely. No, I think as your baby adapts, and, it's a model, it's a company, it's a project, so it has to obviously, you understand more, there's like a new size, but you do also need to adapt. And I can so much recognize in that. I think, just bringing on team members, understanding that you can't touch all the aspects of the product or the business anymore, and empowering, like, you do become more of a manager, I would say, at some point. But like, it's a beautiful word, because what it means is, like, you focus on cooperation, you align with vision on, like, what you want to see happen. I found it fun, and I found it even more interesting to kind of, like, because a project can span for long years, especially when you start as a founder. And so, the mission does provide you a lot of fuel, and I don't want to sort of understate that. I think, the impact that we're doing is also something that also keeps us going, and that is very true. But in the same time, personal changes is also, a part of the reward in that journey, I think. And, I kind of like used to kind of look back 30 days and not 3 years. And each 30 days I would just be, okay, I like understood something different and I need to adapt to this. So that's also like one of the reasons to live for and to try founding a company, I think.
Yeah. I mean, also bringing it back to the investors table, Henry. So, you know, of course, Capricorn invested very early in Tesla, around 15 years ago, I'd say. Much around the same time that Index awarded Tesla an Index Award, so they won a prize. And maybe I could just also like, you know, give some insight as to why at the time. Of course, it was a super aspirational solution, something that took the electrical vehicle away from just looking like a golf buggy, but something that really could really shift behaviors and through the power of aspiration could actually, you know, inspire people. So for Capricorn, what I'm most interested in was, you know, why was it an inspiring case for the company at the time to invest in you know, a fairly unknown company at the time with a grand vision? And you know, 15 years on, you know, has things changed? You know, do you sort of keep to the same recipe of looking for these like significant technologies when it comes to sourcing deals and interesting visionary people to back?
So I love bragging about Tesla because I had nothing to do with that because I wasn't there at the time. So I can essentially brag about other people's good work and tell you what they told me. How they figured it out. I think what was really extraordinary with Tesla was this idea of taking something that had been there for decades, right? I mean, you mentioned the golf buggy. I mean, electric cars had existed for decades, but they were generally poor quality. They had no range, and the problem is batteries were very expensive, right? And so batteries were small. The smaller you make the battery, the more essentially it loses capacity cycle after cycle, and essentially then you have to throw it out. And so you were ending up with these very small vehicles that do look a little bit like, you know, electric golf carts, and no one wanted to buy them because they were just bad performing vehicles. And so even though you know, electric vehicles had been around, essentially there was a design flaw from the beginning that had made every iteration of an electric car fail since the 1970s. And the genius of Tesla and, you know, J.B. Straubel and Mark Tapanick and Elon and the whole team that they had assembled was this idea of like, well, how about we start with a really big battery, right? And people had always avoided the big battery because it was very expensive. They said, well, if you do a big battery, then no one can buy it, and it's just a prototype. And so the whole bet of Tesla is like, well, could we start with a big battery? And if you have a big battery, you have a very high performance vehicle. And then the design process became super interesting because they had to reinvent what a car was, because all of a sudden you had a 500 kilogram, you know, give or take, battery at the base of the car. And it, you know, they didn't really know where to put it originally because cars don't have that today. And they realized, well, what if we put it really at the base of the car and we give it a perfect center of gravity? And that did a lot of things for electric vehicles because essentially it made it much less likely that electric vehicles would roll over, which is a very significant cause of injury and death in car accidents. It also freed up the front of the car. So people are always getting excited about, you know, the front and they can put their bags and things, but the front of the car is actually even more important from a safety perspective because it allows you, instead of having a big engine block that can either crush you if you have a frontal collision or essentially, you know, limits the ability to reduce the violence of an impact in a frontal collision, all of a sudden you had a lot more space to reduce the amount of G's that the passengers of the car would be subjected to in a crash. So without going too nerdy on this, which I'm sure we could do and it would be fun, essentially by completely redesigning what a car could be, they created a better performing vehicle that obviously was almost a miracle for addressing climate change, since about a third of global emissions come from transportation, and electric transportation can allow us to you know, fully avoid that with the combination with renewable energy. And then an added benefit, which is still not very well understood today, is a safety element of electric vehicles, which essentially, because of the lower risk of rollover and because of that crumple zone in front, make them better performing from a safety perspective. And I think we'll see a lot of data arrive around that concept in the coming years. And so maybe just to go full circle on your question, the investment in Tesla was, okay, if we do it today, how many years will it take until we get to a vehicle that most people could potentially afford? And can we scale that to a point where this would challenge the auto industry to completely reinvent its own business and its own product? And it took, as you said, 15 years. And today, every auto manufacturer in the world has announced that they would stop producing internal combustion engine vehicles and make only electric vehicles. So it's a really incredible shift for that industry. And maybe just to tie it to a more recent investment we made 5 years ago, we invested in Joby Aviation, which is an electric plane company. And when you talk about electric planes, people are like, well, that's crazy because batteries are too heavy, you won't have any range. In essence, you get the same criticisms you had for electric cars 15 years ago. And there's also a lack of imagination, which I think is often a problem when new technologies come and sort of challenge the status quo. It's true you can't electrify a 747 today, and it's unlikely we'll be able to do it in the coming years. But there are many other usages of transportation in an electric format that can function today in ranges that are useful for transportation. But they just look and, to be honest, sound different because they're very silent from what we're used to. And so you can move 4 or 5 people over 200 miles in an electric plane. And with a lot of battery investments that we're making in other companies, we can see how that number could increase to 400 miles and 500 miles and beyond in the coming years. And then all of a sudden you have a lot of aviation applications that are commercial today that become relevant with an electric drivetrain. So maybe I'll leave it there because, as you can tell, we're passionate about electric transportation.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see the red thread in terms of, sort of the setting the precedent, and looking for those visionary solutions. But of course, it is about, supporting a visionary team as well. And that I can sense, across the panel here that, we're talking about sort of ideas in our heads and having kind of the imagination to really conceive some of the things which are extraordinary and things which do need to come to life. I'm going to come over to you, Tivolt, because I think the past 2 years, and I just also drawing on what you said earlier in terms of the global pandemic, and of course what we've seen in terms of the effect of what it's done to inclusion in our society, and maybe just also like opening up some of the kind of injustices that we've seen historically. And of course the past 2 years have been quite tumultuous in so far as social racial injustices and the movements that we've seen through protests and the kind of like the social divisions that we've basically had kind of kept to the back burner. I guess, in your view, societal challenges in some ways presents opportunities, especially coming from your personal background of being able to use your skills in building empowering tools. I mean, for startup founders who are really inspired listening to us today, I mean, what advice could you offer for those new emerging talents that are looking at solving critical problems and what would like to just dive into mission-driven solution finding?
Yeah, don't wait, try it now. Do it now is really the core challenge and kind of the motto there. I think it's an exceptional time in the world. It's been very difficult for a lot of people. There's been like incredible new injustices. It's like the fact that some people can work remote. We're having a remote presentation here. It's just not given to everybody, right? Like some people have to stay locally, like have to operate. Sometimes had to expose themselves to like health risks as well. And I think the situation here made a lot of people that traditionally would be a bit more cautious around new solutions basically look for some. Like what happens is in a crisis, maybe for the first time, that's really touching every single person in the world. people, instead of like looking for a reason to say no, are more looking for solutions there, right? And it's kind of like giving an advantage to the prime movers, to the ones who are actually quick on their feet, who are thinking about new solutions and looking for opportunities. So I think part of the core idea here is, you know, trust yourself. If you see something really that, you know, is not working, that you're feeling passionate about, we talked about, you know, the ability to kind of have a vision. And I think it's really, really important. What you mentioned, Henry, it's like seeing into the future, like what should be, you know, what needs to exist. Not just, you know, what people kind of talking about, but really your own assessment of it, you know, and from expertise, from experience, from talking to people. I think that allows you to kind of like think about, hey, if I want to do something that's going to be worthy working on, you know, and it's, even if it takes 10 years, what should be the first step, you know, and right away trying and testing that concept, you know, in a true iterative fashion. I think sometimes there's technologies that are actual locks, you know, that make things complicated. But, you know, as we saw, you know, the electric car was there all along, you know, and it's kind of like the ability to be intensely focused on that sort of issue that you really want to get, you know, sort of get rid of, that may give you kind of that Kindle. For myself, in my own situation, I had to basically be asked the following question, like, what would make you angry that you basically would devote 10 years of your life working on? And that's something, for hearing that question, which was really around anger, you know, this kind of thing that you're not told to use while deciding your future. But honestly, really hearing that key for me just prompted me to say, hey, okay, all right, I'll do this. I'll work on accessibility. I'll focus on a lot of the issues I've seen. And today it's still guiding me, you know, in a way that's really interesting. It's like, because, you know, the kind of change we're looking for, the scale can be frightening. You know, it's like, after 10 years, I think, you know, what's happening here is that we're also seeing the industry changing. You know, basically AI has arrived within the life of deaf hearing people. Speech to text is kind of like more available, but it still doesn't solve all the problems. And you kind of having kind of this confrontation of classical solutions, which are interpreters and transcribers and people who are typing really fast, that suddenly are seeing like speech to text, and they know it's not enough. You know, it's like, if you just run Siri and kind of like expect this to be enough for communication, it won't be, because the reality is like, it's not the same. Like, some words won't correct it, and each time you like have a noisy background, it just doesn't work the same way. So we looked at those problems and we say, hey, instead of saying like, okay, we'll just kind of like force the new into the old system, you know, like, how do we just remake it, like rethink it fully from the ground up? And you know, we came up with this other solution called Scribe, basically taking that job that, you know, has been kind of away from ancient Egypt and that now we don't need, but basically reinventing what it means. And the idea here is that, you know, as the AI is captioning this conversation, in the same time, there's a human person who's listening and seeing the captions and is correcting it. So you kind of combine the human intelligence with the AI together, and you make it a very easy service to use, like instantly available within 30 seconds. And what's important is because you're basically sending a signal that AI is not there to replace sort of the old way. It's here to reinvent and work together, right? But only if you have this kind of comprehensive sort of like motto of like, hey, I want to make things better, you know, because you're really truly passionate about the area, then you can think about kind of a more broader spectrum of solutions, right? And make them work together. And when this happens, it's really truly beautiful, because you, like, my own dad is using it. My sister, like, basically, you know, finished her home law school, and she used it all the last like year and a half. And there's no deaf lawyer in France but her. And so that situation here is that, you know, you enable truly situations because, you know, but like 8 years ago, I had no idea of this, you know. So it's really this thing where you have to like take a bet and take a risk. So all coming back to this, so first idea is just do it. You'll transform yourself in the area, in the process. If it doesn't work, you still will have grown a lot. And so, you know, I think a lot of the moment right now is the right one. People are more flexible. So, you know, try it and don't have a lot of things to lose.
Yeah. Super. Yeah, I love that too. No, I think you just sort of really summed it up in that you know, the comment about taking the risks. I mean, of course, as creators, as designers, I mean, we're constantly testing our ideas, and, you know, of course, yes, we'll have the imagination, but it's also, you know, implementing and in finding ways of interpreting and contextualizing constantly. So, I think this cycle of iterative thinking and, being critical of your own innovations, but also sort of getting the feedback and testing constantly, I think is really, really useful, very powerful. I have obviously a shadow and a sun issue here, but that's okay. I mean, just, but of course, I'm going to find out whether we have some questions from our audience. So if you bear with me, we'll do some adjustments to the sun to see what we can do about that. So first question. How do you actually assess if a company is worth investing in, if they're actually creating a sustainable impact? Things to look at and maybe watch out for. Maybe this one for you, Henry.
Sure. I mean, I think many of us would have a slightly different answer, but I think the way we would mostly look at it is what you're trying to achieve. Like, I think, Thibault, you made a really good point about, like, if you can project yourself in the future and achieve, the best version of success as you see it, is that worth pursuing as an entrepreneur, and also is it exciting enough as an investor that we think it's worth putting capital to work on it for something that may or may not succeed and may take 10 or 15 years. So I think one of the first things is there enough ambition? Are you trying to do something that's big enough and not just incremental? Because if it's to work very hard for 15 years on something that leads to incremental change, it's a little less exciting than working very hard 15 years for something that completely transforms an industry or addresses a key issue. So I think that vision. Is there something at the end that is potentially truly transformational? And then, of course, all the very important building blocks between now and then on how you execute on that vision and the team. And I think maybe one other point that's important is, like, I think especially in this day and age, starting with a global view is incredibly important. I think it's very hard to look at businesses that are siloed in just a single market or a single geography. I think from the beginning, you really have to have that global vision. I actually had a question for Thibault. I was kind of wondering how you were bridging, the different sign languages, and because my understanding is that there are different languages being used in the world, and I assume that also must create some difficulties as well in how you apply technological solution to helping people communicate.
Yeah, so it's not, we're not working on sign language specifically. We're working on making the world accessible for the deaf person using voice to text, right? So a limitation of voice to text today is that when you have a group conversation or multiple people around you, it gets all confused and mixed up. The microphone is too far from the person. So we help multiple people connect around the table, in an in-person conversation, or we just make the distinction of speakers in using the audio on your phone or on your computer. So if you just so it's really voice to text. And the point here is about language, sort of spoken language, less than sign language. The deaf person can answer typing down, pretty quickly.
Fantastic. So I have a question for you, Tivolt. Has it been a challenge getting people to invest in accessibility solutions? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always assume that people don't know anything about accessibility when I enter the room, and about deafness specifically. And that's okay. It's just about sort of the education part and the process. And I do think that a lot of investors I met are very open-minded about learning new sectors. I think, maybe in the past, people were really looking for what's called SOLOMO. It's social, local, mobile. But now people have been very, very, looking at successful companies, taking a whole new vertical industry and doing the hard work, and basically, kind of changing it. So there's still a lot of sort of social trends sometimes where you don't need a lot of explanation. I think the core here is to really connect to an experience that people have had. And I typically kind of use, you being in a different country, right? And you're basically being deaf in this country. People speak and you don't really quite know what they talk about. You do have tools, and you kind of like, trying to write with your guidebook, but that's basically that story, And when I tell you, hey, there's just no way you can even, get better at this language or even get back to your own country, like how does it sound, kind of living your whole life this way? It's tough, and people empathize with the communication challenges here. So it's actually easier to kind of start a rational conversation once you've kind of connected emotionally to the experience of a deaf person, for someone who potentially doesn't have a lot of that background, I think. Now, for the investment part, I think the first thing is, if you're going to see an investor, like, think like an investor first. Like, you're actually your own investor. You investing your time, your own equity as well, and opportunities into the company. And I think investors are very sensible people, who basically are looking at the risks that your business may face. And they're looking at, how big this could be. And I think the more I've gone and grown literate about, what does that mean to build a huge company and to truly change the world, building a huge business is a vector. It's one way to get there. And building a business is a science as well. Like, there's art and science there. And I think as an investor, being able to, just consider, like, if I would be an investor myself, like, would I invest in my own company and start with this, helps you just tremendously, being able to make sure you really covered all the questions that might be asked, and yourself makes a decision on a day-to-day basis. Because it's not just, every year and a half or 2 years that you go to investors that you have to think like an investor. Like, day to day, you'll make business decisions, right? So, if you're feeling that connection with being a founder, otherwise, you may surround yourself with people who are more into that domain and are interested in building a business, as it as a vector. So that's really important. And maybe the last sort of area I'll mention is in impact investing as well. It's like, today people do look for those situations. So I think people do look for something that will inspire them. So, don't hold back on that. Like, in the beginning, I was like, I'll talk about the technology because we really do something that's very different. But I think people also do need to feel, fulfilled in their own work, And so if you explain them exactly what Henry was saying, it's like, the original purpose of investment is actually to, make progress in society and grow what we can do as humanity. That also makes a great connection. And I think an investor is also somebody who's a risk taker, and a risk taker sort of wants to know the people and the projects they're taking risks with.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. To Carmen, what's your take on the boom of alternative textiles on the market? And where do you see Piñatex in this?
The alternative textiles in the market, which I imagine they're talking about alternative to petroleum-based textiles, I would imagine. I think this is really wonderful. I welcome every single one of them, really, because I think we all have a solution, and we're bringing it and seeing it from different angles. Think about, for example, mycelium. It comes from a different thing. It uses different technology. It has different values as well, different science behind it. We and many others were using plant-based, meaning that we're really doing something. Some of us were using waste-based, meaning that, we are really upcycling a waste from agriculture, which is always really good, giving value into the agriculture, meaning some of the poorest people in the planet, which they would be in these subtropical places. So I think we all have different avenues of vision as well and technologies, but together we're still a very growing and energizing group of new textiles, which are bringing a very clear and transparent solution to some of these big traditional, materials. Let's think about leather, think about the petroleum-based textiles, which they really, have to face us in a way and say, okay, so you've got a solution, let us really catch up with you. And I think this is the way I see it. So I really see it as we are a family and we're all different. We speak different languages, but we are really all going in the same direction, which is really very good. And the direction is that we really need to bring a solution to what it is there that really doesn't, because it is a very kind of well-established industry, does not really seem to have a solution. So to me, everything is absolutely quite positive about that.
Yeah. Very exciting. I like that. We're all a family and we're all different. So the last question that we have, any fundraising suggestions for other purpose-driven designers from their experience, especially Carmen and Tivolt? But I would also say, Henry, you might have some also good fundraising suggestions being on the other side of the table. So let's start with you, Henry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no.
No.
Well, it's difficult in a business where essentially you have to end up saying no to most of the people you meet with, because inevitably you take a lot of meetings to learn about new technologies, new ventures, and then you can only invest in a subset of them. So that is actually, certainly a part of this job that's not very fun, right? Because you often find that teams are very passionate, have a great idea, have a great business, but you have to make a selection of the ones you invest in. And, in terms of advice, I would say, really echoing a lot of what Thibault said and what Carmen said earlier. I think, bringing that vision, that passion to the meeting. I don't think people should be shy about trying to fulfill this bigger mission that they've assigned to themselves and to their company. And, of course, you need to check the box on all the usual things, but I think people usually know that going into a meeting, whether it's the team, the execution, the plan, etc. But I think going back again, right, to that vision and to how you get there, and it has to be big enough and ambitious enough that it's worth, even discounted by the probability of failure, it's still worth it, right? It's still worth the journey. And then also, if the aim is big enough, even if you don't get there, you may get to other interesting places that will also create value in the process. And so sometimes you go in a certain direction and then you realize that there's another direction you can take your technology in, and it's also very, very important, very valuable. But that requires having that high level of ambition from day one.
Beautiful. And Carmen?
Yeah, I really think that Henry said it quite a lot. I would really agree with all of it, really. I think you really need to have this high ambition. Personally, for me, I never saw this Piñatex as something that it was just going to bring solutions to, for example, a small cooperative in the Philippines where we're still working. To me, this is a worldwide solution that brings a big, huge impact in people and planet. And this is really, to me as the founder and really carrying the vision now, this purpose, for us is to heal this relationship between people and planet, because if we don't do that, we are going nowhere. We are human, and we've got to really have this empathy for each other, for ourselves first, for each other, and also for the planet. Otherwise, we will not be here, right? There is no planet B, as they say. But then everything, as you say, Henry, it has to be there. The plan, the realist. What is the market? What are the possibilities? Can we really upscale everything that has to be the reality back up to the vision has to be there 100%. And again, there are different levels for different fundraising as well, obviously. If you go for seed capital, well, you're at the beginning, right? So you can't really have this thing. I remember even at the start thinking, my God, we don't even know how we're going to set up the supply chain. I mean, it's non-existent. How are we going to do it? We had no answer to this big thing. Today we do, so every level brings different questions at different levels of that vision. But the bigger picture has to be there, I think. Very important. And believe in it 100%. Otherwise, well, nobody's going to believe in you, obviously.
And maybe like a few things to add. I think for a designer, sort of like minded person that, goes into fundraising, I think the first thing is find the believers. It's like find other people who really share your mission. For some areas it's a bit tougher, but you can connect around social issues and, web research, like you can sort of narrow down some things, but it's going to be meetings, it's going to be a lot of different people that you want to meet and get to know. And, I think it's okay if it's a no also, and I think the first exercise I ever did when I arrived in Berkeley, and it was like, I was from France, so I was very sort of new, this whole area of entrepreneurship, was a rejection exercise. So we would go in the street and basically ask for things that were unreasonable. It's like, can you give me your wallet or something, like not this way, but like a balloon that you hold. And the whole point was to be said no. And that was that first exercise. And this is an exercise you can do anywhere, you know? So I think being said no is okay because it's not personal. Like, you know, it's a business. It's like people are just trying to kind of like make that vast matchmaking of companies, risks, investors. And I think, you know, connecting with people who believe into the company is important. Now, you know, it can't be always story and emotion and kind of the belief. It also has to be the, you know, the rationale and the system, and discipline is really important there. And I think a fundraising process is a process also, you know, and that means, you know, meeting a certain number of people and doing this in a short amount of time, creating urgency. Like there's art and science around this that has been, you know, documented on the internet, but I think it is very true. It holds true there. And the whole point there is your time is valuable as much as the investor's time. And, you know, if you think about it as you're solving a really hard problem and a big problem, then your time is valuable. Like you have other priorities to focus on. And that means that the fundraising is just another moment, you know, the same way as, you know, hiring a top executive or, you know, choosing a new shift in terms of your strategy on some other areas. And so, you know, people do fear about the fundraising, like there's a lot of situation there, but I think it's relativizing the no's, like being able to pursue hearing and listening why people refuse also, if they do share. Because usually it's very smart people and sharp people who can help you kind of refine your idea. But, you know, you can find a believer, you know, around the world, I think. And especially now where people can pitch on Zoom, like this is incredible. This has changed. You know, it was not the case when I started up. Like you needed to be in Silicon Valley, you need to be in the Bay Area, you know, relatively, but it was mostly where investments were done. Now I think it's changing. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tivolt. Well, I'm afraid that we could continue, but I think, you know, time is up. I think this has just been an exceptional panel discussion. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, just some sort of like capture kind of key things that I've taken. It's about thinking about the bigger picture, being global from the outset, taking those risks, having the high ambition. I think, you know, for us, and, you know, I think there's a shared belief of having the imagination and daring to take those risks. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you, Henry, Carmen, Tivolt. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and your experience with us today. Thank you, dear audience, for being with us. Say goodbye.
Yes.
Thank you so much from where you are.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
That was such an insightful discussion. It's up on the indexprojects.org to rewatch. But the 10 Days of Design continues with the Designers Masterclass from some of our most successful alumni, such as Don Ping Wong from Food New York, Masood Hassani from Mind Caffon Lab, and Chantu Akasu from Leodol Medical. It starts at 3 p.m. CEST. See you there.